Good morning friends, welcome back again. Today I am here with second part of respiration in plants of 11th standard. In this session we are going to discuss about fate of pyruvic acid. This pyruvic acid is formed at the end of glycolysis as you have seen earlier. And fermentation, difference between lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation as well as aerobic respiration. So let us start the session with fate of pyruvic acid. There are three ways in which different cells handle pyruvic acid produced by glycolysis. So let us see what are the three ways. The three ways are lactic acid fermentation, alcoholic fermentation and aerobic respiration. Fermentation takes place under anaerobic conditions in many prokaryotes and unicellular eukaryotes. Now let us discuss about fermentation. Fermentation is not common in higher plants but common in certain microorganisms. Fermentation occurs outside the living cells. Living cells are not essential in some fermentation. In higher plants, it occurs for a temporary phase under anaerobic conditions and it also occurs temporarily in microorganisms. In fermentation, only 2 ATP of energy is released. There is heat generation in fermentation and it is toxic to higher plants. It occurs in absence of oxygen in many prokaryotes and unicellular eukaryotes. There is incomplete breakdown of glucose and the end products are ethanol, that is ethyl alcohol, and carbon dioxide in alcoholic fermentation, whereas lactic acid fermentation produces lactic acid. Now let us see the difference between lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation takes place in a single step with the utilization of NADH plus H plus and produce NAD plus. Whereas alcoholic fermentation takes place in two steps. Only one enzyme, that is lactic dehydrogenase with zinc ion, is used in lactic acid fermentation. But in alcoholic fermentation, two enzymes. What are the name of enzyme? Pyruvate decarboxylase with magnesium ion and alcoholic dehydrogenase are used. Lactic acid fermentation do not release carbon dioxide, whereas alcoholic fermentation releases carbon dioxide. Lactic acid fermentation occurs in certain bacteria, some fungi and vertebrate muscle cells, whereas alcoholic fermentation produces ethyl alcohol in plants and most microorganisms. Lactic acid fermentation do not form any intermediate compound, but alcoholic fermentation forms acetaldehyde as an intermediate compound. In lactic acid fermentation, lactic acid is formed from pyruvate or pyruvic acid, whereas in alcoholic fermentation, alcohol is produced from pyruvate. Here, this is the flow chart to show the major pathway of this anaerobic respiration. Now it is about aerobic respiration, which takes place in mitochondria. Stepwise breakdown of respiratory substrates to form carbon dioxide and water in the presence of oxygen is referred to as aerobic respiration. The events are: first, the complete oxidation of pyruvate by the stepwise removal of all hydrogen atoms, leaving only 3 molecules of carbon dioxide, and this takes place in the matrix of mitochondria. Now the second event is passing on the electrons removed as a part of hydrogen atoms to molecular oxygen with simultaneous synthesis of ATP, and this takes place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. The reaction is catalyzed by pyruvic dehydrogenase and if required participation of several coenzymes including NAD plus and coenzyme A. Here the reaction is given pyruvic acid plus Coenzyme A, NAD plus, it will form acetyl CoA plus carbon dioxide plus NADH plus hydrogen plus in the presence of magnesium and pyruvate dehydrogenase. So this is all about today's session. Thank you. For any kind of doubts, please write your question in comment section.